Have you ever looked around and felt like something was off? Not just with politics, not just with the media, but something deeper. A strange silence, a blind acceptance, a terrifying emptiness where thought used to be. You're not imagining it. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a man who faced the horror of Nazi Germany firsthand, left behind a warning so powerful, so unsettling that most people today still haven't heard it. A warning not about hate, not about violence, but something far more dangerous. Stupidity. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. That's not just a quote. That's a diagnosis. Bonhoeffer, a theologian and anti-Nazi dissident, didn't come to this conclusion lightly. He spent years watching ordinary decent people turn blind, silent, and compliant under a regime that slaughtered millions. They weren't all evil. They weren't all cowards. But they were, as he put it, infected. Not with a disease of the body, but of the mind. The invisible infection. We usually think of stupidity as ignorance, as not knowing facts, but Bonhoeffer saw something different, something darker. To him, stupidity wasn't a lack of intelligence, it was a surrender of thought, a decision, conscious or unconscious, to stop thinking, to outsource moral responsibility to the group, to the leader, to the truth everyone believes. And here's the terrifying part. The more a person becomes part of a group, the dumber they often become. Bonhoeffer wrote, "Upon closer observation, it becomes apparent that every strong upsurge of power in the public sphere, be it of a political or religious nature, infects a large part of humankind with stupidity." Read that again. He's not saying dumb people join power movements. He's saying powerful movements make people dumb. Not because they're weak, but because they give up the burden of thought in exchange for the comfort of certainty. The anatomy of the virus. Stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's view, is not a passive state. It's a moral failure. Why? Because a stupid person is unreachable. Not because they're incapable of understanding, but because they don't want to. You can't reason with them. You can't show them evidence. They'll smile, nod, and repeat the slogans. Not out of cruelty, but because the machinery of independent thought has shut down. This is what makes stupidity so dangerous. The malicious person can be stopped, exposed, punished, but the stupid person might be your neighbor, your coworker, your teacher, your friend, and they will help build the cage that holds you, smiling the whole time. Modern parallels. Can you see it? Look around. How many people now simply repeat what they're told without question? Not just in authoritarian regimes, but in so-called free societies. When fear spreads, whether it's fear of enemies, disease, rejection, or economic collapse, people stop thinking. They start complying. Not because they're evil, but because they're tired. They just want someone to tell them what to do. And power, real power, thrives on that exhaustion. Bonhoeffer wasn't just talking about Nazi Germany. He was talking about something timeless, a pattern that shows up wherever power becomes concentrated and people become afraid. But wait. Aren't we all guilty? Before you point fingers, pause. Bonhoeffer wasn't trying to shame stupid people. He was warning all of us that this virus lives inside every human being. Whenever you scroll endlessly without questioning, whenever you nod along with the crowd just to fit in, whenever you silence your doubt because it's inconvenient, you participate in the virus. You feed it. You become a little less yourself. Stupidity, in this sense, is not a fixed trait. It's a choice we make again and again. To think or not to think. To see or to look away. To stand alone or hide in the herd. Bonhoeffer's courage and his cost. So why should we listen to him? Because he lived it. Bonhoeffer didn't just write essays in safety. He was imprisoned. He was tortured. He was eventually executed in 1945 for standing up to a machine that demanded silence. He didn't hate stupid people. He loved humanity too much to ignore what stupidity was doing to it. He believed that the only cure for the virus wasn't more intelligence. It was moral courage. The courage to think, to resist, to speak when it's dangerous, to act when it's easier to wait. And now, it's your turn to ask. So now, we turn to you. Have you ever found yourself going along with something, just because it was easier? Have you ever watched someone say something absurd, and seen others nod as if it made perfect sense? Did you speak up, or did you stay quiet? This isn't about shame. It's about waking up. Because Bonhoeffer's terrifying idea still applies today, maybe more than ever. And if the virus spreads in silence, then maybe clarity, awareness, and moral courage are the only real vaccine. In the next part, we'll go deeper into how this mind virus shows up in daily life, in politics, in media, in families, and what Bonhoeffer believed was the first step to breaking free. But for now, ask yourself, Where in my life have I stopped thinking? And what would it take to begin again? Bonhoeffer's warning wasn't just about the individual. He saw stupidity as a contagion, a virus that spreads not through argument, but through atmosphere. It thrives not in isolation, but in groups, in communities, institutions, and especially in places where critical thought is silenced by conformity. This is where stupidity becomes not just dangerous, but systemic. Stupidity, in Bonhoeffer's view, isn't merely a personal flaw. It's a social phenomenon. It emerges when individuals surrender their reasoning, their doubts, and their sense of responsibility, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've chosen comfort over clarity. The moment a person joins a group where thinking for yourself is seen as disloyal or inconvenient, stupidity can take hold. And when it does, it spreads like wildfire. Look around you. Have you ever noticed how smart people with degrees, with status, with influence, can fall for the most absurd ideas the moment they're in a crowd? That's not ignorance. That's submission. That's the virus at work. Bonhoeffer wrote, "Stupidity is not a lack of intelligence, but a moral defect." And what he meant was, stupidity becomes entrenched when people refuse to see, refuse to question, refuse to speak, because it's safer to stay silent, because it's easier to echo what's already being said. You can see it in corporate boardrooms, where everyone nods in agreement even when the strategy is obviously flawed. You see it in politics, where elected officials abandon truth for slogans. You see it online, where echo chambers reinforce the same belief until any dissent feels like betrayal. And you see it in everyday life, when people mock new ideas, laugh off hard truths, or blindly follow what everyone else is doing. This kind of stupidity doesn't wear a clown suit. It wears a uniform. It speaks in polite tones. It uses official language. And because it sounds intelligent, it's far more dangerous than ignorance. It convinces you that thinking is being done for you. Bonhoeffer called this a form of violence. Not the kind that bruises the skin, but the kind that numbs the mind. Because when a person loses their ability to think independently, to reflect, to challenge, what's left? Just compliance. And compliant people are easily manipulated. That's the scariest part. Stupidity, once rooted in a group, becomes weaponized. It's no longer just about being misinformed. It becomes a tool of control. Bonhoeffer observed that totalitarian regimes rely not just on censorship, but on cultivating stupidity among their people. Why? Because stupid people are not just easier to govern. They are eager to be governed. They don't want responsibility. They want certainty. They don't want freedom. They want safety. They don't want to ask questions. They want answers handed to them, wrapped in simple language, delivered by someone who promises to protect them from the chaos of truth. This, Bonhoeffer argued, is why stupidity is more dangerous than evil. Evil, at least, has a logic. Evil knows what it's doing. Evil can be confronted, exposed, resisted. But stupidity, it doesn't even know it's causing harm. It doesn't argue. It repeats. It doesn't reflect. It reacts. And it cloaks itself in decency, loyalty, tradition. That's why you can't fight stupidity with facts alone. Because the root of the problem isn't knowledge. It's cowardice. Cowardice to think. Cowardice to speak. Cowardice to stand alone when the group demands you fall in line. Bonhoeffer saw this during the rise of the Nazi regime. Ordinary citizens, doctors, teachers, priests, slowly lost their moral compass, not because they became evil, but because they stopped thinking. They let propaganda replace reflection. They chose slogans over soul-searching, and by the time they woke up, it was too late. They were complicit. Sound familiar? Think about how this same mechanism plays out today. Algorithms feed you what you already believe. Social media punishes nuance. Outrage is rewarded. Conformity is celebrated. People don't debate anymore. They cancel, they shame, they block. Truth is no longer what is evident. It's what is repeated the loudest. So how do we resist this virus? Not by mocking others, not by retreating in silence, but by reclaiming the courage to think clearly. Bonhoeffer believed that true intelligence was not just a mental gift. It was a moral choice. It meant being willing to be misunderstood, willing to be mocked, willing to be the only one standing when everyone else is sitting. It meant understanding that freedom starts not in rebellion, but in reflection. This is the first antidote to stupidity: solitude. Bonhoeffer spent time in prison, but he never let the prison inside him. Because in solitude, he remembered who he was. He thought for himself. He refused to be shaped by the echo of the crowd. In today's world, solitude is rare, but vital. It's where your mind detoxes from noise and your values return to clarity. And the second antidote? Speech. Not loud, angry speech, but clear, honest words. When stupidity relies on silence to thrive, speaking up, even quietly, becomes revolutionary. Say what you mean. Question what feels off. Refuse to repeat what you don't understand. Bonhoeffer wrote, "Silence in the face of evil is itself evil." And in a world where stupidity has been normalized, where it wears suits, leads institutions, and runs algorithms, your mind must be your last line of defense. So ask yourself, are you thinking for yourself? Or are you just echoing what sounds safe? Are you questioning what you've inherited? Or are you repeating it because it's comfortable? Because if you're not thinking, someone else is doing it for you. And that's exactly how stupidity wins. What Bonhoeffer described over 80 years ago wasn't just a warning about political regimes, it was a mirror for human nature. And today, psychologists have given a name to what he saw. They call it functional stupidity. Functional stupidity isn't the absence of intelligence. It's the refusal to use it. It's what happens when smart people deliberately shut off critical thinking. Not because they can't think, but because thinking is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or socially dangerous. This is what makes it so terrifying. The people infected by it often seem competent. They follow rules, they perform tasks, they attend meetings and send emails. They might even have advanced degrees. But what they don't do is question. They don't reflect. They don't challenge assumptions. Why? Because the system they live in rewards obedience over originality. It praises compliance over clarity. It incentivizes loyalty, not truth. Have you ever sat in a corporate meeting where everyone agrees to something that clearly doesn't make sense? No one speaks up, not because they're all fools, but because speaking up carries risk. Risk of looking negative. Risk of rocking the boat. Risk of becoming a target. So they nod. They smile. They repeat jargon like synergy, alignment, scalability. Words that sound intelligent but mean absolutely nothing. That's functional stupidity in action, and it's not just in business. You see it in universities where students parrot what their professors want to hear, not because they believe it, but because they want the grade. You see it in politics, where representatives read from scripts written by lobbyists. You see it in churches, where questioning doctrine is confused with disobedience. This is what Bonhoeffer feared most. Not ignorance, but unconscious obedience. People who stop thinking not because they are incapable, but because they've been trained not to. Because the reward structure of their environment punishes dissent and praises submission. And here's the deeper danger. The longer you participate in functional stupidity, the harder it becomes to remember how to think. Your instincts get dull. Your curiosity fades. You start to mistake repetition for knowledge. And soon, you're not just acting dumb. You become numb. Bonhoeffer understood that this transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's slow. It's subtle. First, you compromise a little. Then, a little more. You laugh at a joke that feels wrong. You stay silent during a meeting that violates your values. You tell yourself, it's just easier this way. Until one day, you don't even notice the gap between your actions and your truth. And this is when stupidity becomes institutionalized. You're no longer dealing with individual bad choices. You're dealing with entire systems, schools, companies, governments, that are designed not to educate, but to domesticate. Systems that don't ask what is true, but what will maintain order. This is why we live in a world where critical thinkers are often labeled as troublemakers, where whistleblowers are punished, where the one who raises questions is called negative, difficult, or not a team player. Bonhoeffer would call these systems spiritually dead, because they no longer produce people, they produce parts, interchangeable, obedient, predictable, the kind of people who follow the rules, even when the rules lead to destruction. Think about how many horrors in history were carried out not by monsters, but by people who were just doing their job, people who filed the papers, followed the chain of command, looked the other way. That's not evil in its traditional form. That's functional stupidity weaponized. But let's bring it closer to home. How many of us have silenced our inner voice to keep the peace? How many times have you bitten your tongue at work, in your relationship, in your community? Just to avoid conflict? How many ideas have you swallowed because they were too radical, too complicated, or wouldn't make a difference anyway? This is how it starts. And unless we wake up to it, we become the very thing we fear. So, what's the way out? Reflection. Bonhoeffer believed that the most powerful resistance against stupidity is not rebellion. It's awareness, to sit with discomfort, to ask yourself, what do I really believe? Not what your friends believe, not what your boss believes, not what your social media feed rewards, but you, and once you know, to act. That's the real threat to functional stupidity, a mind that refuses to be outsourced. But there's a cost. Thinking for yourself means standing alone at times. It means being misunderstood. It means losing approval. And in a world where likes, followers, and status are currency, that can feel like death. But it's not death. It's rebirth. Because something strange happens when you start thinking clearly. You don't just see the world differently. You see yourself differently. You begin to notice where you've compromised, where you've conformed, where you've lost yourself. And you begin the slow, painful, liberating journey back to integrity. Bonhoeffer didn't call for revolution with guns. He called for revolution of the mind. And that revolution starts not with others, but with you. It starts when you ask, what do I know that I'm pretending not to know? What lie have I repeated so often it started to sound like truth? What silence am I keeping that's slowly killing me? Because the most terrifying virus isn't the one outside, it's the one inside. And the moment you choose to think again, to speak again, to live again, the spell breaks. You are no longer just a function. You are a force. And that force, once awakened, becomes the most dangerous thing to any system built on functional stupidity. A human being who sees clearly. So here we are, surrounded by information, drowning in opinions, connected to billions of people, and yet never more vulnerable to stupidity in its most dangerous form. Not because we're not smart, but because we've been taught not to trust our minds, not to slow down, not to reflect, not to challenge, not to disobey. Bonhoeffer warned us that stupidity is not an intellectual defect. It is a moral failure. And worse, it's a contagious one. It spreads through language, through silence, through culture. The people around you may not scream propaganda, but they might subtly reward you for not asking questions. They might promote the agreeable, demote the insightful, and quietly pressure everyone to just get along. Here's the hard truth. You don't need a dictatorship to experience the effects of tyranny. Sometimes all it takes is a meeting room, a trending hashtag, a family dinner, or a spiritual leader who asks for loyalty more than truth. This is why stupidity is so powerful, because it disguises itself. It looks like politeness. It sounds like consensus. It feels like safety. But what it is the slow erosion of your will. And once you lose that, your ability to ask, to speak, to walk away, then they don't need to control you. You'll control yourself. This is the terrifying brilliance of what Bonhoeffer observed. It's not just that stupid people exist. It's that intelligent people under pressure can become stupid. If the environment rewards silence and punishes thinking, even the brightest minds will shut off. Think of the whistleblower who gets fired, the student who challenges dogma and gets labeled a problem, the employee who questions a company policy and is told to stay in their lane, the child who asks why and is met with, because I said so. We don't kill intelligence. We smother it, with politeness, with shame, with reward systems that praise passivity and punish originality. And then we wonder, why is the world so broken? But Bonhoeffer never wrote just to point fingers. He wrote to call people back to themselves. He believed that reclaiming our minds was the only path to real freedom. Not political freedom, not religious freedom, spiritual freedom, the kind of freedom that no external system can give you, and none can take away once you've claimed it. So, how do we fight back? Let's be clear. This isn't about being contrarian for the sake of it. It's not about shouting louder or rejecting every rule. That's just another form of emotional reactivity. And emotional reactivity is easily manipulated. This is about something quieter, more difficult, more dangerous to broken systems. This is about awakening the individual mind. It starts with a pause. When someone says something that makes your gut tighten, even if it's framed as kind or smart or popular, pause. Ask, is this true or just familiar? It continues with refusal. The refusal to laugh at a joke that feels off. The refusal to nod along with an opinion you don't believe. The refusal to share a post just because everyone else is. You start thinking again, not reacting, not mimicking, not performing, just thinking. Bonhoeffer believed that moral courage is not heroic, it's ordinary. It's the everyday person who refuses to betray their conscience. It's the teacher who tells the truth when the curriculum lies. The friend who speaks up when everyone else is silent. The employee who says, this isn't right. Each of these acts is small, but together they become a force. They become resistance. Resistance not through violence, but through vision. A vision of a world where intelligence is not silenced, where conscience is not mocked, where truth is not outsourced to the loudest or most powerful voice in the room. We don't need more geniuses. We need more people who are awake, people who are willing to pay the price of clarity, who are willing to be called difficult, weird, too much, because they refuse to become part of a machine that feeds on silence. So here's the question Bonhoeffer would ask you now. Where have you gone blind, just to feel safe? Where have you gone silent, just to be accepted? Where have you traded truth for convenience? Because if you can name that place, You can reclaim it. And the moment you do, something powerful happens. You stop being part of the system. You stop being a function. You become a human again, not a follower, not a machine, not a repeating echo of other people's thoughts, but a thinking, feeling, conscious presence in the world. That's what stupidity fears most. Not rebellion, not war, but a quiet mind that refuses to go numb. Because once one person sees clearly, others will start to see too. And soon, the virus breaks. Not through violence, but through awakening. You weren't born to obey without question. You were not born to become what others need you to be. You were born to think, to feel, to speak, to know. And in a world addicted to comfort, that kind of awareness is a revolution. So don't wait for permission. Reclaim your mind. Reclaim your voice. Reclaim your life. Because the cost of functional stupidity is not just lost opportunity, it's lost humanity. Bonhoeffer's truth still echoes through time. And now, it's your turn to listen and respond.